Alatreon is an incredibly controversial monster in World, so much so that even though I already made a video discussing him, there's been so much conversation in the comment section that I feel compelled to make this follow-up video months later. If you haven't watched the original video, I do recommend you to go and do so for full context. However, I'll do my best to cover points, assuming the majority of you haven't seen it, so don't worry. Also, if you haven't noticed, I'm a bit sick. As a result, my voice is a bit deeper than usual. But with that being said, let's dive into why I believe the community is still so divided by this monster. First and foremost, Alatreon is unlocked at Master Rank 24, which is incredibly easy to access for a new player. For reference, you don't unlock Ruin and Nergigante until Master Rank 70, and you don't unlock Tempered Elder Dragons until Master Rank 100. My assumption is that Capcom wanted all players to be able to engage with this content. However, I feel that this idea became more destructive than helpful as it confused the game's pacing. New players wouldn't have been on a year-long journey with their save file, getting better at the game and growing stronger via armor and decorations. Being able to access it pretty soon after beating Iceborne's story is ridiculous when you think about it. But a new player wouldn't know that, and they all of a sudden get hit with this insane wall, get frustrated and quit, not knowing that realistically they shouldn't even been trying to do this quest. I genuinely believe this is where the majority of the community's frustration comes from, but we'll loop back into that later. For now, let's talk about elemental damage. A big criticism I've seen is that elemental based builds didn't really have much of a place in the game at the time of his release, or should I say rather, non-elemental builds were the meta prior to his release. As a result, when this update went live, no one had appropriate gear ready to face him. Korthroth and Safi'jiiva had already been made available prior to this hunt, which do both provide, generally speaking, the best elemental gear in the game. The tools we needed had already been given to us. However, if you didn't play these patches and hop back into the game wanting to fight this new foe, there would have been a much greater barrier of entry. But don't you agree that it should be that way? Here's what I'll say. While Korth and Safi gear are what you ideally want going into this, they're also top tier meta builds. The best you can get. You don't need these to do the hunt. In my previous video, I took him on multiple times with suboptimal armor, weapons and decorations just to demonstrate exactly this point. In fact, one of the hunts I'm playing in the background of this video is a non-elemental build. And don't get me wrong, most new players, myself included at that time, didn't have a clue what to do here. Elemental damage in Monster Hunter is kind of a weird one to understand in the first place and requires its own guide. But speaking as someone who was previously one of these confused players, I don't think we should even be allowed to embark on the quest in the first place. Also, quick side note, I do agree that the very first time you go into the hunt is unfair. The NPCs do explain during the fight what you need to do for his mechanic, but if you didn't know that going into the quest, you can't particularly act on their advice without at least taking one cart and swapping gear in the tent. And had you not had an elemental build ready, well, it's GG. Coming back to the new players shouldn't be allowed to do him thing, I'm not gatekeeping content here. This just relates back to my initial point. Master Rank 24 is simply way too early to participate in this content. Or, if it was intended to be accessible this soon into Master Rank, much more information should be provided to the player as to how it works. The argument could be made that the whole game teaches you how elemental weakness works in subtle ways, such as looking up monsters' weaknesses in the hunter notes, but I think we're all in agreement that this fight in particular is in a league of its own. Maybe even a monster who followed similar yet dialed down mechanics as Alatreon could have been introduced first to teach us that concept. If the quest wasn't available until Master Rank 120 for example, I think nothing would need to change surrounding this. A player who has progressed to that point should already be knowledgeable enough to overcome the hurdle without needing any hand-holding. I do wonder how much the pandemic could have impacted the final months of World. Maybe a lot of this was planned but needed to be cut short due to the extreme circumstances we faced at that time. Let's move on to something I fundamentally disagree with, and this was brought up quite a few times in the comment section of my previous video. So some people voice their opinion that an issue with Alatreon is that it forces you to play the game in a particular way. Your options are way more limited in how you can approach the hunt, and that this causes the fight to not feel like Monster Hunter. I could be cynical here and mention that again you technically can beat him with anything, non-elemental included if you're good enough, but I do understand the general point that's being made here. Alatreon is intended to be faced with an elemental build of a specific element to counter his ice or fire, and it's intended for the player to break his horns in a specific time window to keep him in that exploited state. So let's talk about that. Yes, you're absolutely right. The fight does require you to bend to its rules and walk away from what you personally want to do. But it's Alatreon. He's classified as a black dragon, a creature so powerful that it's able to bring about unprecedented calamity to the world. Don't you agree it's completely within reason here that us as regular humans have to bend to his rules in his arena? Maybe I'm reading way too much into this and leaning into the lore a bit too much, but I do truly believe this to be the developer's intention with him. From a pure gameplay perspective, I understand that some players will simply not find it fun, but many others, myself included, enjoy the unique challenge posed by him. It may simply boil down to you either love him or hate him. Let me know what you think in the comments. Maybe there's something I'm missing extra here. Now, I will say that we can't deny that some weapons have a much harder time against him than others. I won't go into too much detail, but different weapons have different motion values which help determine elemental damage. Put simply, some weapons are way less effective at outputting elemental damage than others. There's straight up no way I can really defend this. Honestly, it's my main issue with his design. With many players' game identity being tied to one of the 14 weapons, I imagine it's not a great feeling seeing dual blade players rip through the DPS checks, while gunlance players are fighting for their life to reach it one time. In my opinion though, this is an issue with how the game functions as a whole, and Alatreon just highlights the issue. Because he highlights the issue, a lot of people direct that frustration towards this fight in particular, where in reality what we're seeking here is a fundamental change to how that elemental damage is calculated. Now, Eschaton Judgment. His big ultimate move is an interesting one to discuss. I believe it's fine that if you fail the mechanic, it one-shots you. In multiplayer, however, this is very much so flawed. 7 minutes is all it takes for a multiplayer hunt to end. Taking him on solo means you can die to his Eschaton Judgment twice and keep playing. That's how it's possible to beat him using a raw build, but in multiplayer, 1 EJ means it's GG. Maybe multiplayer should have the quest cart limit up so that at least you can fail 1 Eschaton Judgment, but I'm not sure. Would that make the quest a bit too easy in multiplayer? Right now it's certainly without question way easier to solo him, unless of course you have 3 solid players in your party that know what they're doing. Playing with randoms more than likely leads to failure and isn't a great experience. If you want to see more on that, I recommend you to watch this video. I take on Alatreon as well as Fatalis in SOS hunts, which did provide a lot of insight going into this video months later. Moving on, Alatreon's general moveset and behaviours I personally think are great. Once you get used to him, you realise that everything he does is well telegraphed, and he has an abundance of openings and vulnerable moments. This idea that he spams crazy AoE and doesn't give you the time to breathe just isn't true. Initially, it will certainly feel that way, but again it is supposed to be a very hard fight. There's a lot of timings to learn, but I don't think he does anything broken or stupid, it just takes some time to adapt to. As I mentioned, this is the second time we've visited this guy on the channel. Thanks to all of you guys, I think my opinion on this fight is a bit more substantial now, as you gave me a lot to think about. Majority of the points made here today have derived straight from conversations we had in the previous video's comment section. Let's keep that going here. Use the comment section below to voice your opinion. I'll be down there once again to continue conversations with all of you. Maybe it will result in a third part to the saga. To conclude, I like Alatreon. He's unique, memorable, and challenges you as a player in a way nothing else does. The beauty of this hunt is starting out unable to reach the DPS check, but eventually getting good enough that you can completely ignore the mechanic in the first place. Thanks for watching. Oh, and yes, wallbanging is absolutely horrible.